The fire sale in Pittsburgh is underway as we get a report from a Pittsburgh Penguins insider saying Marcus Pettersson is on the block with two teams being interested and among the race for him. And we also get many other big names that the Penguins are looking to move. We're going to break all this down and more later on this episode. Before we start, I just want to give a huge shout out to everyone that's subscribed. If you're part of the 91% that's not subscribed yet and you're enjoying this daily NHL content, make sure to go down and hit that subscribe button. It's completely free and you can stay up to date on everything to do in the NHL. With that, Darius, let's just hop into the fact that the Pittsburgh Penguins are looking on moving from a guy like Marcus Pettersson. Now, Josh Yeo of The Athletic did a report saying that Marcus Pettersson is on the block and the Vancouver Canucks and Edmonton Oilers are interested in the 6'5", 175-pound defenseman. This is a player that's going to fetch a lot, in my opinion. We were kind of talking about before recording this. A $4 million cap hit is quite easily eatable by a lot of teams. A 6'5" defenseman. He's a guy that hasn't played on the power play, but he did put up 40 points last year. He's looked good next to Erik Karlsson, and I mean, as good as you can look with the Penguins looking to just kind of struggling to start the year. But Darius, looking at this, do you think Marcus Pettersson's one of these guys that's going to fetch a lot more than fans are expecting?
I think a lot more than fans are expecting, because when they look at him at the pit on the Pittsburgh Penguins, they see a top four defenseman and somebody that, nobody really talks about, because obviously they have Letang, they have Karlsson, and Pettersson, I think, takes a back seat in that way. But this is a very effective player. In fact, probably their best defenseman, at least on both sides of the ice at this point in his career, and obviously where Letang is and Karlsson and their play. But just focusing in on the Pittsburgh Penguins, they're going to get a great return for this player. I do think that they're going to move on from this player because it's very difficult to move on from some of the other contracts. So this is a no-brainer for me to get a really good return. And it might not be soon, but I think by the trade deadline, this will be a player that they're definitely going to move off of. And I think he's an attractive asset for a lot of teams around the league, especially contenders that have injury troubles. And one team we're going to bring up and get into as well, the Edmonton Oilers. I think they could really use a lot of help on defense. And this is a guy who can go in pretty seamlessly and do exactly what they need more of. So I think there's a lot of teams waiting in line to get a player like this. And I think the fire sale is about to begin. I think Kyle Dubas he must know that, the writing is on the wall. Some guys have to start going. And if he has to get rid of some of the easier contracts and move first, then so be it. But I do think this guy's going to fetch a lot.
And I mean, looking at Pettersson among the team, he's actually putting up one of the highest points on this team. I mean, 8 points. You can see just above him, Beauvillier is a guy with 9 points. Raquel, Karlsson, Crosby, Malkin. But having 8 points on a struggling Pittsburgh team, a guy that can eat about 20 plus minutes a game. He plays on the top penalty kill. He hasn't got a lot of power play time. So these points would actually go up. I'm going to go in and talk a tiny bit about the Canucks. I mean, we've seen this report from Elliot Freeman. He came out and said the Canucks are impatient and annoyed. Their defense hasn't been doing it. And we know that Jim Rutherford likes to jump on trade deadline ahead of other teams. Jim Rutherford has a lot of ties with this Pittsburgh Penguins team, being the general manager there, being the president of hockey ops with Vancouver. I think there is a world where we see the Canucks go out and make a trade, especially if Trader Jim, wants to go out and acquire a former player who he actually signed this contract with. When we see Marcus Pettersson sign his extension, he is on the last year of it. When he signed this with the Pittsburgh Penguins, this was a product of Jim Rutherford. We could see him go out, want to add him to this Canucks top four, adding them to a contending team, and they do have a lot of prospects. The first prospects a lot of people are going to look at is someone like Jonathan Leckemecki, Tom Williner, but I don't think the Canucks are going to budge on this. The Canucks do have a bit of draft capital. They do have some prospects. Melvin Fernstrom's the guy they drafted this year in the third round. He's playing in Abro HK in the Swedish Hockey League, making a bit of a name for himself. So maybe a prospect like this, a pick. Darius, I'll throw it to you. Do you think the Oilers could kind of outmatch this, or do you think they need him more?
I think the Oilers do need him more than the Canucks. I think the Canucks defense, if you look at their defense core, is a lot better than the Oilers, especially right now with Darnell Nurse out. And obviously injuries happen. We don't know what's going to happen before the playoffs, but I think the Oilers need a lot more help. In saying that, it's interesting that you bring up prospects and draft picks, because Kyle Dubas wants more NHL ready players in a draft in return for some of these players that he's going to be trading. And if you look at the Edmonton Oilers, they only have 4 draft picks in this draft. Maybe Pittsburgh would be more open to a draft pick, in 2026 or 2027, something like that, because they know that the road is going to be a little bit long to kind of rebuild and retool here. So maybe they're open to that. But the Canucks have more draft picks this year. So I think it's more enticing to trade him to the Canucks. I think if you're the Canucks, you're solidifying your defense just that much more as well on the left side. So that being said, I do think that the Oilers could use him more, but I'm not sure what the Oilers can offer that is NHL ready. I think the Canucks have a little bit more in that regard. And if you're the Canucks, I think this is a guy who could, again, solidify your defense. This would really put everything together, I think. And, maybe not put you over the top to win a Stanley Cup, but maybe a piece or two more. Maybe you're looking at that. And of course, if you have some goaltending help and some good news on that front, that could work too. But it's interesting. I think the Oilers are probably more desperate, but I just don't know if their assets match up to the Canucks.
And I mean, the biggest thing is there's going to be a bidding war on a guy like Pettersson. He's a guy in a 1 year deal. Well, the last year of his deal, I should say. It's $4 million. The biggest thing with this is the closer you get to deadline, the lower the cap it's going to be. So a lot of contending teams can fit this under the cap, but it doesn't stop there. Where we see continue on to say that Kyle Dubas could be interested in moving defenseman Ryan Graves, Erik Karlsson, and Tristan Jarry. He doesn't think that obviously all these contracts will move out in the same deal because it's a lot of money is the better way to say it. But looking at this, Erik Karlsson is a guy that's an interesting one. A $10 million cap hit, we can see his production slowly decline. I mean, when we've seen him with the San Jose Sharks, winning the Norris, putting up 101 points. He continues into Pittsburgh, putting up 56 points in 82 games. Now he's on a pace for just under 45 or 46 points. Darius, do you think this is a deal that maybe the Penguins and Kyle Dubas can get off? Or do you think it's more of, hey, we're kind of stuck with a guy like Karlsson for the next few years?
So Kyle Dubas has come out and said that everyone is available except for Sidney Crosby at this point. And if you're going to make a list, I would put Erik Karlsson number 2, because that looks like it's a contract that is not going to move. It's going to be impossible to move that contract, because if you want to, at this point, if you're the Pittsburgh Penguins, they're already retaining salary on other deals like Riley Smith with the New York Rangers that they made this past offseason. So they're out of spots to retain more salary. It's a bit of a disaster in that way. So you're going to have to get a third team involved. Maybe you're giving up assets in that regard as well. So I think it's a disaster in that regard. And Erik Karlsson is not the player he was. Just 2 seasons removed from putting up over 100 points. He's on pace to be less than a point a game player this year. So it's a bit of a disaster. I don't think it's going to be easy to move off of that player. Certainly not any of those names in the same trade. It's going to have to be separate trades, that's for sure. But again, like I mentioned earlier in the video, maybe they're looking at Pettersson or Graves, moving off of those pieces first, getting young guys in the door, learn from the veterans, because it's difficult. You can't really trade the veterans right now. The contracts do not allow it. And Ryan Graves is on a tough contract as well. I think it's definitely more movable than Erik Karlsson, I think, at this point, considering age and what Graves could be on maybe a better team. But they're in a tricky situation. I think that they're going to have to give up guys like Pettersson and maybe Graves over Erik Karlsson, because I just don't see another team willing to take all that salary, and the Penguins are not in a position to retain any more salary.
And the biggest thing with Karlsson is I think what the Penguins should and probably will do, I'm not a general manager for a reason, is to maybe hold on to Karlsson, try to get him back to just a kind of a bit of himself of what he was last year and with the San Jose Sharks. If we see Karlsson go out and really get his motor going, we see him put up 15 points in the next 20 games, it does help with moving him. But at this current pace, at him being a -8, it's going to be hard to move on. And then it gets into a guy like Tristan Jarry as well. Darius, I'll kind of leave it to you. I mean, looking at the save percentage, it's going to seem like another hard contract to move.
Definitely a hard contract to move. This is a sub-league average goaltender at this point. He makes quite a bit of money. Obviously was sent down for a conditioning stint this year. He came back up and did not look good. There's been question marks about his work ethic and how, locked in he is in practice and some of these scenarios. So there's a lot of question marks around him in Pittsburgh. I'm not sure another team would want to take this on. And it's not a situation where, he comes with some baggage and you can deal with it because he's a great goaltender. He isn't a great goaltender. He hasn't shown that in the last couple of years. And there were, flashes of brilliance the last couple of years, maybe, 3-4 years ago. But at this point, this is not a goaltender that I don't think is enticing for many teams to take on. It would have to be a very interesting and creative trade for Pittsburgh to move off of this guy. And I think that unfortunately they're just going to have to, ride with him as their goalie for the time being, because unless the team is, in some serious goaltending trouble, like maybe Colorado was earlier this year, or, injuries do happen. I'm looking at Carolina as well, but I think that they found an answer with Spencer Martin as well. So it's interesting. I think they're going to have to get creative if they do want to move off of it. But unfortunately, I think they have a lot of contracts that they just can't move off of.
And I mean, the biggest thing is teams are going to get desperate when it gets to deadline. Like you said, injuries happen. Teams are just looking to fill in needs. It could be a guy like Marcus Pettersson. It could be like a guy like Erik Karlsson. Maybe the Boston Bruins, after firing their head coach, wants to go and throw more money at a league average defender. But either way, what's your guys' thoughts on everything? What's your thoughts on Pettersson seeming to be moved? What's your thoughts on guys like Tristan Jarry, Erik Karlsson, and Ryan Greaves being on the trade block? Let us know down in the comments. But I've been your host, Mark, with my co-host Darius, and take care.